This meeting is being recorded.
So it's 3 minutes past. Let's make a start. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining today's session. I'm Sean Gibb. I'm the Events and Marketing Manager here at Pro Manchester, and I'm delighted to welcome you to Amid the Great Resignation, Perks and Pay Are No Longer Enough, hosted by United Minds, which is part of the Weber Shandwick Collective. Following today's session, I'll send out a post-event email, which will contain any post-event collateral, links to where you can find out more information. We've also got a copy of the report to send out, and also a link to this recording that will be on our YouTube channel. It'll also contain our feedback forms. If you could just take 2 minutes to feedback, it really does help us to improve and continually provide great content. If there's space on there for you to give us ideas about what other things you'd like to see from Pro Manchester, so do just fill that in. Just a couple of points of housekeeping you will have heard, but please be aware that this webinar is being recorded. Feel free to use the chat function to ask questions, make any comments, observations, and more than feel free. We encourage it. We'll be opening up for a bit of a discussion at the end, so that would be appreciated. If you could please all keep your microphones on mute for the time being, just to ensure the best sound quality. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Stephen Duncan, the Executive Vice President of United Minds.
Well, thank you, Sean, and it's a pleasure to speak to so many of you today. Thank you for giving up some of your day to listen to what we have to say. I'm really, excited to talk to you about this because, we're hearing more and more talk in this country about the Great Resignation. This is something that I think in the US they've been experiencing for a little bit longer, and in this country, I think in the last month or two, we've seen a lot of chatter about the Great Resignation. If you read the business press or other media outlets, you're hearing this phrase being repeated time and time again. And I think what we're seeing, and I'll give you some data points for this in a moment or two, is really unprecedented turmoil in the jobs market. Levels of people leaving organizations that are far higher than they've ever been before. And so we want to kind of give you some things to think about in terms of what do you need to do as employers that will help you to address those challenges. Just a little bit about myself before I get into that. So as Sean kindly said, I'm Stephen Duncan. I've been working in this area for around about 30 years, helping organizations working around areas like change and culture, employee experience. I've been fortunate enough to do that with organizations around the world in many different industries. And for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been leading United Minds here in Europe. And we're a consulting firm that's part of the broader Weber Shandwick family. So we sort of specialize very much on what goes on inside organizations, but we work very closely with our colleagues in Weber Shandwick, and when we're doing big research projects like the one that I'm going to talk to you about, we actually work with our own in-house research company called KRC Research, who provide the competence and the expertise in how to do really large-scale research, market research properly. And I can tell you a little bit about how we've got to the results that we're sharing in a short while. Before we get into all of that, I'd like to just simply ask a question, and Sean's going to put up a poll just in a moment or two, really just to get a sense of where your organizations are. Anecdotally, we've heard, and there seems to be a growing body of evidence that lots and lots of organizations are seeing lots of difficulty retaining staff, and that there's lots of increased rates of turnover. But we'd love to get a sense of where your organizations are. So Sean, if you could just put the poll up for people to respond to, let's get a sense of where your organizations are. So Sean's going to put up the poll and basically asking the question, are you seeing higher levels of turnover than you did previously? So is it higher, about the same, lower, or for some of you might not be able to answer that question, but we'd love to just get a sense of where your organizations are. So Sean, can you launch the poll, please?
Yeah, that's there. We've got plenty of answers coming in.
Great. So for a lot of organizations, it looks like it's, round about the same, but there's a significant portion of organizations, about a third, based on this, admittedly very unscientific survey, but a third of you are seeing that turnover has gone over, and there's a couple of you have been fortunate enough not to have a decrease in your turnover. And that kind of really gels with what we're seeing in the marketplace generally. Just some data points here, which we think are, quite interesting. One of the bits of research that I was looking at recently was a survey by McKinsey that said 40% of people are somewhat likely to leave their current job in the next 3 to 6 months. Now, that doesn't mean that they necessarily will end up doing that, but 40% is a very large number. And this is a time series piece of research that McKinsey have done consistently over the last few years. Typically, the number there is 10 to 15%. So, clearly something has changed in the marketplace. People are now much more likely to want to look for a job than has ever been the case before. And, as our little very unscientific piece of research shows there, that actually is playing out in the marketplace. And what's also interesting in the McKinsey research is that many of the people that are leaving jobs don't necessarily have jobs to move to. They just want to change jobs. They just want out of the job that they're in today. So perhaps they're planning to take a career break. Perhaps they want to set up themselves. And perhaps they just feel so burnt out from work that they just need to give themselves some space to heal a little bit. But, it's clear that there is, a lot of turmoil that we've not experienced before. And I'm sure much of that is linked to the fact that nearly 50% of people, and I'm sure this is perhaps the case for some of the folks on this call, particularly as we got towards the end of last year, that sense of just being really burnt out, the kind of the stresses that we've been operating under during the pandemic, where we've been having to deal with illness in the family, potentially dealing with kids at home rather than at school, the blurring between work and private lives, all of those things which have contributed to this sense of just being exhausted towards the end of last year is certainly one of the factors that I'm sure is contributing to that level of turnover. And this is a really important issue for organizations because replacing people is not cheap. A lot of the data that we've looked at says that if you need to replace somebody, it's going to cost your business anywhere between 30 and 400% of the starting salary for that individual to make that replacement. So, that's going to have a really huge impact on organizations' profitability, their margins, their overall business performance. And so if we aren't able as employers to find ways to actually hold on to people, and more so beyond that, to compete more effectively in the market for jobs, we can't just simply do that by paying people more and more and more. We have to find ways of retaining people. We have to find ways of recruiting people that aren't purely dependent on paying higher and higher salaries. There was some interesting information provided in the Financial Times this week, which some of you may have seen, just talk about the level of salaries being offered to newly graduated lawyers in London. Some of the top law firms in London now offering £150,000 a year for a lawyer who's just come out of university with no experience, because there's just such demand and lack of available people. That's driving salary costs up, which ultimately will be passed on to their clients. And we've seen similar challenges with lorry drivers, with other kinds of categories of employee. Just supply is not keeping up with demand. And the answer cannot always be just simply throwing more money at people to try and persuade them to stay, because frankly that works sometimes as a as a driver of retention, but often that's just a very short-term band-aid rather than something that will solve the problem in the long term. So at United Minds, we've been really interested in what can employers do to address this issue of how do you make yourself more attractive as a place for people to come and work, and also as an employer that will then be able to retain the talented people that you need to be successful in the future. And so we launched a research project that was designed to truly get at the heart of what is it that creates a great employee experience for the people that work in your organization. And we wanted to do that in a really scientific, a really global way. So we worked with our colleagues at KRC Research that I mentioned a moment or two ago to do a really thorough, methodologically sound analysis of what is it that people want out of that exchange in value between an employer and employee. And we talked to several thousand people from a number of different markets around the world, so the US, Canada, UK, Germany, and also in China and Japan, to get a kind of global perspective on this across a range of different industries. So not just representing, one or two industries, trying to get a wide range of industries, and also a range of different people at different levels of seniority in those organizations, and people that are in what we traditionally call blue collar, white collar, what we sometimes refer to these days as pink collar roles as well. So we wanted to get a pretty wide sample of people to test what is it that delivers on a great employee experience. And we had a set of different factors, different things that we thought contributed to that. And really what we wanted to explore through our research was, what do people actually value? What is it that matters to people working in organizations today that they really put the most emphasis on? And what we were also able to do, because this wasn't a thing driven by an employer, because this is people volunteering their own personal perspective, we also were able to do some interesting cuts based on diversity, whether that's inherent or acquired, that often employers themselves struggle to be able to ask. So, testing people based on their sexual orientation, their ethnicity, other factors that for all kinds of good reasons, it's sometimes very difficult for employers to track. We were able to look at that and cut some of our data based on those factors as well, which gave us some really interesting insights, which I'll share in just a moment or two. So we did this research last year. We plan to repeat this research because there's a danger that we recognize that some of what people will say will be skewed by their experience of being in the midst of a global pandemic. So we plan to run our research again once we're a little bit further out of that scenario, and hopefully we'll be able to see if any of the things that people are saying today matter to them. That may well change in the future when we don't have the issue of a pandemic looming over all of our lives. What we got out of the research were 6 key findings that we found really interesting. And for each of these, I'll just give you a little bit more background, a little bit more detail that will hopefully help you understand what we mean by these things. The 6 factors are these. So 1, a fair deal. As I mentioned a moment or two ago, this process of being employed is an exchange of value. Employers give you things, and in return they expect things. And the sense that that is fair, that what I give as an employee is matched by what I get back from my employer, is really important. And that's changing. And I'll take you through some of the factors that really matter there in a moment. The second key finding was that whenever people experience unfairness, so discrimination or harassment or some other kind of unfair treatment, that has a real serious impact on that person's perceptions of the organization they work for. But it doesn't have to be a direct experience. Sometimes if we see others receiving that kind of unfairness, again, that really has a quite dramatic impact on how people feel about an organization and their willingness to work hard or to stay in that organization. The third thing that we found was the importance of fun. And this was reassuring, I guess, but interesting what people meant by fun. And I'll explain that in a little more. It's not necessarily the kind of organized fun that a lot of employers go for. Something more meaningful needs to be delivered as part of that experience. Something more about connecting with others. It's not just fun and ping pong tables in the canteen. There is something more meaningful needs to be part of that fun for it to really matter to people. Fourth thing is around appreciation and motivation and recognition, and that creates a really virtuous cycle. And actually that was really important to people. So receiving recognition creates motivation, creates more opportunities for appreciation, and really can have a very positive impact on how people feel about the company they work for. Number 5 was that connection between what organizations say they stand for and what they actually do. So if an organization goes out and talks about sustainability or diversity or social justice or any of the other things that many employers want to talk about because that's good for their reputation with consumers, if their actual performance, their actual actions, which their employees will see before anyone else, do not live up to that, then again, that undermines credibility of employers and undermines people's belief in what people are being told and see and actually know about the organization they work for. And so closing that gap, making sure that what an organization says and what it does has a really big impact on its ability to retain people. And ultimately, in a world of Glassdoor, where everything that is private within organizations very quickly becomes public, its ability to recruit people also. And then finally, flexibility, but not just think about this in terms purely of the ability to work from home, other facets of flexibility being important also. So what I'll do over the next sort of 10 or 15 minutes is just take you through each of these in just a little bit more detail, just to give you a real sense of what's going on in your organization, what's going on in other organizations as well, and hopefully give you some sense of what it is you can do to actually make a big impact in your business and for your people. So looking at the first of those, just in terms of getting a fair deal, if you look at the right-hand side of the slide, when we think of a fair deal, this is not simply about paying people, more money. Certainly paying a competitive salary and giving competitive benefits is there, but it's only the fourth most important factor that relates to this fairness of the deal. Things that people consider to be even more important are job security. That's really important. People knowing that they're going to not just be having a job in the short term, but knowing that they can make long-term plans in their lives and have the job security that will allow them to execute against those is really important. A positive work environment, trustworthy peers, people that we can rely on and trust and have confidence in, are all more important in terms of that exchange of value between what we get and what we give. They're even more important to people than the competitiveness of our salary and benefits. That's not to say that salary isn't important. It's just that there are other things that we need to think about as well. So the first thing that you've got to think about is, just this fairness of the deal that you're offering people. Thinking about the exchange of value that you give, and for each organization that will be different. What a large, talked about lawyers earlier on, what a big law firm will do in terms of job security and offering a competitive salary and benefits will be very different to a Holly Age firm. But relative to the marketplace that each of those different businesses is operating in, these are the things that we have to get right. And there are some things that are so fundamental, so human, in terms of trustworthiness of peers and a positive work environment, that I think would apply equally to any organization. The flip side of getting a fair deal was around this sense of unfairness and the threat of unfairness, and the threat and the impact that unfair treatment has on us. And this was one of the most startling results of the research that we did, that a third of people, 1 in 3 people that we spoke to, said that they had experienced unfair treatment, and including discrimination and harassment at work. And that's a really quite startling number. I mean, if you think about the number of people on this call today, that's 1 in 10 of the people, 1 in 10 of the people here, sorry, 10 of the people out of the people on this call will themselves have faced this at work. It's a quite startlingly large number. And the impact of that is really quite dramatic. You know, the performance of organizations was lower for people in organizations where people were experiencing unfairness. People were less likely to be advocates for their organization. Yeah, and they're also experiencing much, much higher rates of turnover. So where unfairness is tolerated in organizations, where it's not dealt with, where the rules are not applied properly, then you will see much, much worse outcomes for that business than if that unfairness is dealt with and addressed, and in time gradually removed from the organization as a whole. And this is where our ability to actually segment the data based on diversity really gave us, you know, a really interesting ability to identify, you know, where are the real kind of hubs of unfairness, and the demographics that we identified as reporting really unfair treatment. And this may not be surprising, but you know, people who have different abilities, people who are not white, people who have an LGBT plus sexual orientation, people who are born in a different country to the one that they're working in, people who have different religious beliefs to the majority in the country that they're operating. Single people report being more discriminated against than married people, and younger people as well. And if you think where the real challenge in terms of recruiting people is, which tends to be at that younger end of the age spectrum, if an organization gets a reputation for treating people unfairly, your ability to recruit millennials and Gen Z and people coming into the workforce out of university and out of school will be much greater than if you've got a reputation for being somewhere that those people are nurtured and nourished. So, you know, this is an area that I think all organizations need to really look at. You know, every organization in the world has policies and codes of conduct, but having a code of conduct is different to really understanding what people's experience is. And I think, you know, often we hide behind codes of conduct and other, you know, policies and procedures. What do people actually experience, and understanding perhaps how people exit organizations and listening to what people are telling you in that, understanding kind of what the experience of people is, will go a long way to helping you address these issues of unfairness. Because if you don't do that, then, you know, it will be very quickly that your reputation as an employer starts to diminish. On a slightly lighter note, you know, the importance of fun at work. Now, you know, we've also been kind of, certainly in the UK in the last sort of 48 hours, been kind of going through the kind of trauma of is bringing your own booze to work, a good thing or a bad thing. But, you know, fun at work is really important, but not the kind of classic gimmicky, you know, organized fun that so many organizations think. It's not about free apples in the canteen and you know, ping pong tables for people to play at during breaks. You know, what people are looking for is fun with other people, you know, a really positive work environment and a fun place to work. But that's about the relationships with the colleagues that they work with, and giving you the opportunity to have time to interact with those people and in a fun way and have fun with them. That's what people are looking for, not necessarily all those sorts of organized fun that so many organizations default to. when they're thinking about how do we make our environment more positive. So it's being thoughtful about who you recruit. It's about being thoughtful about giving people space to actually, interact with their colleagues in ways that allow them to do enjoyable things together, and also in ways that deliver meaning to the work that they're doing. This is not just about having fun for the sake of fun. It's sometimes also about making sure that the work that they're doing is really meaningful and contributes to the overall performance of the business, so that their fun, the joy, the pleasure they take out of the work they do is because partly they can see how that contributes to the overall success of the organization that they work for. The fourth factor is around appreciation and motivation. And in actual fact, although I'm talking about this fourth, it's actually in terms of how people ranked the importance of factors. This is where the second and the third most important things that people flagged. Feeling appreciation for their contributions, and feeling motivated or energized to do my best work. And there is a kind of virtuous cycle there. If people receive appreciation, that increases their motivation. The more motivated people are, they do better work. That creates more opportunities for recognition. And this doesn't have to take the form. In fact, I would say that in many respects, it should never take the form of just purely annual awards programs and big strategic set piece recognition. This is also about just that simple thanks for a job well done. Being told in a timely manner by someone that actually matters to the person receiving the recognition, whether that's their direct line manager or a respected leader, thanks for what they've done. That's very specific about what it is that they did, not just a bland, great job, people, you did a fantastic, you've worked really hard, well done, but thank you for doing this very specific thing, so that you're making it very clear to the people receiving the recognition that you have seen exactly what it is that you're recognizing them for. And when they receive that, then that creates this virtuous cycle. When that doesn't happen, where people don't get that, then people are a lot less motivated, a lot less energized, and we see people sort of getting into this sort of set of beliefs that their manager isn't committed to their success, that they don't get positive feedback, and that their manager isn't supportive of what they're trying to do day to day. And there is that well-known saying about people don't leave companies, they leave managers. This is something that all organizations can do something very quickly about, in terms of encouraging managers to do more recognition of their people. Just simply calling people out in team meetings, or recognizing them just with a little handwritten note to say thank you for doing something. There's a wonderful example that I was sharing with some people recently around the chief executive of Campbell's Soups, who over his career wrote tens of thousands of handwritten notes to individual employees, maybe just 5 or 10 a day, just calling them out for something great that they've done. And that really, that personal touch, just a small gesture, but that personal touch had a huge impact on how people in that organization felt, and tens of thousands of people over the career of that chief executive, received one of these notes. And I'm sure that in terms of just their motivation, how they felt about that organization, really boosts people and creates this very positive cycle of appreciation and motivation. The fifth piece is something I talked about earlier on. So this point about if you as an organization say you stand for something, then you have to actually act in that way. And so there are some fairly obvious areas where a lot of organizations are quite happy to take a public stance that says, where they stand on social justice, on issues of around the environment and climate change, but if their actions don't match up with the statements and the policies and the things they're saying in public, employees will know. And if your credibility will be diminished if you don't then deliver on those things that you're saying. If you talk about diversity and then, encourage, don't encourage women in the workplace, or don't have ways of accessing different pools of talent to diversify your workforce. If you just continue to have, the same groups represented on your board or your executive leadership teams, then people very quickly will start to understand that what you say and what you do are two very different things. And for leaders, that's a very dangerous space to get into. If you don't follow through on those commitments that you make publicly, people will start to question all those other commitments that you make to them. When you say things about job security, which we talked about right at the very beginning, people will start to question whether those things are sincere and are actually truthful also. So if organizations are going to make these public statements around issues like this, they have to follow through on that. They have to be seen to act. And employees, as I said a moment or two ago, will be the very first to know if that's not the case. And in a world where we have Glassdoor and Indeed and all these other means by which people can talk about their actual experience inside organizations, this isn't going to be closed within the four walls of your organization. Eventually, people will learn that the things that you're saying are not matched by your actions. And it's really important for you as an employer to make sure that you actually do deliver on those commitments. If you don't, then very quickly you will find people leaving. You will find it harder to recruit people because people will see through that greenwashing or the other reputation building activities that you're creating aimed at consumers, and shareholders and regulators and non-governmental organizations. Your employees very quickly will see through that facade. And the last point is this point about flexibility. And for so long, the debate around flexibility and flexible working has tended to focus on the ability to work remotely and the ability to work from home. And I'm sure this is one thing that is a function of when we've done this research, because I think the debate about where we work is now settled once and for all. And whilst not every job allows people to work remotely, it's very clear that people are perfectly capable of working remotely and on the whole working productively. And although there are some costs associated with that, that's not the issue. People can have whatever element of flexibility they want in terms of where they work. But the real debate around flexibility now is moving on to other issues of how they work and when they work. And in particular, their ability to balance their work life with other aspects of their lives as well. And I think one thing that so many people have been reporting during the pandemic is this blurring of work time and personal time, and not necessarily being able to make this the firm division between work and private life that we have in the past. So many of us are probably sitting in our own offices at home, sitting in our kitchen tables or wherever we may be sitting at the moment. We're intruding into our private lives. Our work lives are getting blurred. So at the times that we start working and we finish working, our day is getting longer. And all of those things are leading to that burnout that I spoke about earlier on. So for organizations that want to deliver a great employee experience, delivering on that ability to get work and life in balance, that's what people are looking for, not just giving them the ability to work from home when they want to. It's the whole concept of flexibility. So how they work, where they work, those are the things that people are looking for at this point in time. And this will be one thing that will be really interesting to track as we get into, hopefully into 2022 and beyond, when the pandemic hopefully becomes a distant memory for us. Will people's expectations in this respect of what they want from an employer and what employers need to offer, will this change? Is this fixed forever? And people are talking a lot about the future of work. I suspect that this isn't just going to be something that becomes fixed in stone. I suspect this is going to be very, very fluid, and what people's expectations are, what they want from employers, are likely to change quite a lot. But at the moment, if you want to be able to compete really well for talent and hold on to the people you've got, this is an area that, again, you need to give some real hard thought to. How can you make your experience for people as flexible as possible. Now, clearly, again, that will vary from industry to industry, from role to role. There are some roles where flexibility just isn't as easy as it is in others. If you're providing a service to the public, or you're providing a production line type jobs for people, flexibility will have to mean something very different. But that willingness as an employer to look at how you can make people's work and life better and balanced, that's so important. What that actually means in practice will vary from one company to another. So those are the 6 factors that we've really drilled into, and what we've actually done with this is we've started to build out a model of how you create a great employee experience, and so we call this Nexus, and we've sort of broken this up into sort of 4 main elements. What we consider to be non-negotiable for organizations, that I feel safe, I feel secure and included, regardless of how senior I am or what my background is. And if you get that right, then you can think about what I as an individual employee give, and making sure that that's purposeful and has value to the organization. And what I'll get in return for doing that is greater independence and an ability to decide how I approach my work, and that flexibility that we were just talking about. And then you can start to create that positive work environment that really creates the context in which the fun and the enjoyment of work can happen. Now, and we've been working with this model. We've been testing this out with a number of organizations, using this for them to be able to help sort of establish their strategies for how they can deliver on better experiences, and using this to build plans and to build better strategies, things that they can then use to just be better, deliver a better experience to their people, get as an outcome from that better retention, better satisfaction, and greater advocacy for their people. And we do that through a couple of main channels. We do some work around running that survey that we did globally. We can run that for organizations to see how you compare to that global benchmark. And then for some organizations, we've also been building out that whole plan so that you can kind of really develop a strategy that allows you to really clarify what that exchange of value is, to clarify what the give and the get is, and make sure that you as an employer are getting from your people what you need, but also so that your employees are getting from you what they want and what will motivate them to stay with you in the long term. So I know Sean's keen to have sort of 15-20 minutes or so of discussion at the end. So I'll put up my contact details just now, but we're going to share these slides afterwards. You'll be able to get a hold of these later if you want to get in touch with me, or reach out to me on Twitter. But now what I'm going to do is hand it back to Sean and go through any questions that you may have. I think Sean may have some questions to start off with, but happy to answer any other questions that people have.
Great, thank you very much, Stephen. Yeah, the floor is open. If you would like to ask a question, you can add it to the chat function, or you can, I believe you can raise your hand. But yeah, to kick things off, what were the most surprising things you saw in the results, Stephen?
I think the single most surprising thing was that just the number of people that reported having experienced some kind of unfair treatment. I think for me that was one really surprising result. The second thing that I found also, when we looked into the data, as I mentioned when we were talking about how we set the survey up, we had people from all around the world, and it was surprising to me just how universal what people are looking for was. We were actually one of the reasons that we were keen to get places like Japan and China and the US and Latin America into the survey, was that we felt that there might well be some, geographic variety in the results, but actually that wasn't the case. So a lot of this is quite universal. There does seem to be something that is quite fundamental in what people are looking for in this exchange of value. So those two things, one, the level of unfairness, and two, just the extent to which people around the world agree on what matters to them from employment. I think I just noticed a question from Fiona coming in that I think sort of builds on that potentially. But this question about, did they raise this with HR or line managers? We didn't specifically ask that question if they did raise it. My suspicion is that if you just look at, most organizations, what we're getting at here is a massive underreporting of discrimination and unfair treatment. If I don't know, Fiona, if you're an HR professional, but if you look at the proportion of people in your organization that come forward with issues that they've personally experienced, it would be nowhere near a third of your population of employees. It might be 1%, which suggests that there's a huge unreported level of unfairness and discrimination that people are experiencing that they do nothing about, that they live with, or they vote with their feet and they leave the organization. So my suspicion is that, whilst many of those people will have raised their experiences with HR, I actually suspect that a large proportion of them won't have, and choose either just to talk to their colleagues about what they've experienced, or to leave the organization. And perhaps that will come out during an exit interview. But again, I think a lot of people would actually just experience it and then leave and go and work somewhere else. So my suspicion, but I don't have hard data on this, is that a large proportion of those people won't have reported that to HR. And maybe that, for HR professionals, raises a question of, how can we get a better, more accessible, means that people feel more comfortable raising these issues, and what's stopping people coming forward with this, if that is the case. The traditional kind of helplines and other routes that we've got, perhaps those aren't working as well as we would like them to.
Great. Another question here: how universal are the findings? Do they apply to certain markets or certain employee segments, or is it just across the board?
Yeah, I think I may have answered that question a moment or two ago, but yeah, it is very universal, and again, that was quite surprising to me. I expected this to be different. I think what won't be universal is the answers and the solutions that you develop, because and I'm sure we all know this from our own personal experience. There are different business cultures in different parts of the world, and how people do business in Japan is different to the way that we do things in the UK. So the answers may be different. How we address issues of job security, or issues around fun at work, or closing that appreciation gap, they may be different cultural norms in different parts of the world, so the answers may be different, but the kind of things that people are looking for in terms of a great experience, those do seem to be, on the whole, very, very universal. One thing that we hope to do this year, sorry, Sean, just if I can add one more thing, is we are going to publish some, we've got all kinds of, as you would imagine with a piece of research like this, we've got lots of cross-tab data. So we're going to look to do some specific reporting on 2 or 3 specific industries, I think financial services, manufacturing, and healthcare. And also we'll be doing some sort of specific reporting around different countries, and just, to the extent that there is any variation, but as I say, it's relatively minor. We will be sort of reporting on kind of how the UK varies from that global norm, but it's surprising how little variety there actually is in this, which kind of makes me think that we've hit on something that's kind of fairly universal, and applies equally in Latin America as it does here in the UK.
At the very top of your presentation at the start, we discussed that those percentages of people that were maybe considering leaving in the coming months. Do we know what the kind of age range of those people were?
people leaving.
Yeah, or people thinking of leaving. But yes, someone had asked about maybe what the age range of those people are.
I think that was just across the board. But other data that I've seen, certainly in terms of the 40% was some research that came from McKinsey. I didn't see that broken down by age, but other data I've seen has again said that that this seems to be something that's impacting younger workers more than older workers. And again, that might be, you saw when we were talking about unfairness, that people who are younger tend to feel like they're being discriminated against. So I suspect that there's maybe more of that amongst younger workers. So, you know, those millennial, Gen Z people that are just coming into the workforce. But it's hard to really pin that down. Most of the research in the Great Resignation is showing this is impacting organizations regardless of what sector they're in, regarding of which country they're in. And I think it's also kind of pretty neutral in terms of the age of people. I just think we're at a point in time where people are really looking to make a change in their lives and reconsidering what's important to them. And I don't think that's specific to any particular age group. I think that's, you know, across the board. I think we've all been going through similar experiences and you know, questioning what really matters and leading to people making the choices that they are making.
We've got a question here. How would you advise companies to deal with change without it negatively impacting culture? Says we're a very close team, and with the various lockdowns and working from home orders, it's been difficult, particularly when new starters join. And what would your thoughts be, advice on welcoming new starters whilst remote working?
Yeah, there's a couple of kind of really good questions in there, and you know, the first thing I would say about the culture is that your culture has changed, you know, and you can't stop that. When you know, culture is not a fixed thing. You know, an organizational culture is the aggregate experiences of an organization and what it learns over a period of time. And your culture now is different to what it was in March of 2020. And it will not go back to what it was in March of 2020. It's you know, there's an arrow of time that goes in one direction, and you won't be able to turn the clock back to that. So an organization's culture, every organization's culture, is now different to what it was before, and we cannot get it back to what it was then, because the experiences and the lessons that we've learned that in aggregate go to make up the culture that we have as an organization, that all our organizations have, is now different to what it was before. So any organization that kind of thinks that its culture is this sort of fixed thing and doesn't change over time, it is a little bit, you know, I just don't think that plays out in the real world. So, you know, every organization on this planet's culture has changed. Some will have changed for the better, some will have changed for the worse. They will continue to change, and it's what leaders and you know, what they do in terms of how we get people back into the workplace. You know, think particularly for organizations that have had largely people working from home. You know, how you go about doing that will dictate what the next stage in the evolution of your organizational culture is going to look like. In terms of new starters and so on, those are the people that I think have had the worst experience in the last 20 months or so, 24 months. You know, it's been so hard for organizations, and it's really quite telling the number of people, even in my organization, that there are people who have joined our organization and left our organization, and none of us have ever really met them. You know, we may have had some contact with them, but you know, those people I think have really struggled. And you know, and I'd be perfectly honest, you know, we're not immune to that as well. It is a question, I think, of, you know, what are they missing out on that they would have got if they were part of, you know, in more traditional times. You know, it is that ability to build networks, it's that ability to make connection, that's ability to tap into that kind of shared knowledge base, and to tap into all those sort of you know, those you know, wise ways of working. That's the thing that people are missing. And so, you know, the things that we've been trying to do to address that are, you know, not just giving people a buddy, and using sort of mentoring type systems, but actually giving them multiple mentors. So as many points of access to the organization, as many people that can help them build their networks as we possibly can. Really thinking through how do we deliver as much of that experience that they would have got immersing themselves in our world as we can without actually physically being present with us in a room at that point in time. So those are the things that we've been trying very hard to do, is really just replicating that experience, building connection, building network in ways which you just can't do purely using technology like this. So that, I think, is the challenge that all organizations are facing. But it comes down to helping what's missing, connectedness, access to information, access to knowledge, all those types of things. How do you recreate that in the virtual world, and not just simply doing it once, but doing it many times to actually create the impact that you want.
Brilliant. Any more questions, or anyone? You can just pop off mute and have a chat, or add something to the chat. It's up to you. We've got a question here. Younger people seem to have more of a sense of entitlement, and also more aware of the peers' work experience through social media. Could the combination of these perhaps be contributing to the perception of unfairness?
I'm not sure if I would necessarily agree with the language of sense of entitlement, and I think that's a little bit damning. But they certainly, I think, have higher expectations for work than perhaps people of my generation and others have. So in terms of what that exchange of value is, they have a very different expectation to the one that I had when I came into work, and that's fair enough. That's that's based on their experience growing up. But the second point I absolutely agree with, in terms of the ability for people to find out about what work is like now is much different to what it was when I entered the workplace. For me to find out about my first employer, I had to, just by luck, know some people that worked there and was able to ask questions. These days, there's Glassdoor, there's Indeed, there's all kinds of other means by which you can find out the truth of what people's real experience is. So people don't just simply believe the blurb that they see on careers pages. They absolutely expect that experience to be delivered on. And I think the challenge for organizations, the things that is really important, is that you can't get away any longer with saying one thing and doing something different. And you have to follow through on those commitments. You have to follow through on the things that you promise have to be the things that people receive. And what you've got with people in the sort of Gen Z millennial generation is what they've got are skills that allow them to get better access to information and the ability to use that information to make better decisions and better judgments about who they're going to invest their human capital in for a long period of time. And if they don't get what they are promised, then they will leave and go somewhere else. So I think the advantage that younger people in the workforce have over, the situation I had when I entered the workforce is just much better access to information. And then they use that information to make different choices. And I think that probably applies more broadly also to, better information about an organization's, environmental performance, or performance on things like gender pay gap reporting, which we have to publish on our websites. People can find out more about what organizations are really like now than has ever been the case before. And they use that information to make judgments and decisions about who they want to work for. And I think that's that's very different to the situation that existed 20, 30 years ago when I was entering the workforce. If I knew somebody, great, I could get that kind of insight, but that was luck or or chance that allowed me to find that out. Now that information's in the public domain.
Thank you very much. Any more for any more? Oh, any more? Yeah, any more questions at all? Just I'm just conscious of time now. We're nearly there now.
Yeah. Yeah, nice point from Fiona. I think that point about Gen X is really, really, really good one.
Lovely. Well, I've really enjoyed that. So thank you very, very much. Huge thank you to United Minds, to Webber Shamwick, and to Stephen. And thank you to all of you for attending. So I will follow up with my post-event email shortly, and I look forward to seeing you all at the next one. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Goodbye.